Imagine a quiet evening on May 26, 1828, as the shadows in Nuremberg's market square began to lengthen, and the city prepared for its usual nightly calm. At this hour, as artisans closed their shops and guards prepared for their rounds, a strange silhouette appeared on the cobblestone pavement. It was a youth of about 16 or 17 years, whose gait resembled that of a person testing the ground for the first time. He didn't just walk, he wavered, as if the space around him was hostile or utterly unfamiliar. Clutched in his hands was a letter addressed to the commander of the 4th Squadron of the 6th Regiment of Light Cavalry. But it was not the message itself that attracted the attention of the rare passers-by, but the expression on his face, a mixture of profound bewilderment and an almost childlike purity, untouched by any social experience. The youth could utter only a few fragmented phrases, which sounded like memorized incantations, meaningless to him, but which became the first thread in the most tangled ball of 19th-century mysteries. The appearance of this stranger became for Nuremberg not merely a civic event, but a true intellectual and social upheaval. In an era when Enlightenment sought to classify every aspect of human existence, this teenager, who was given the name Kaspar Hauser, represented a blank slate upon which history had not yet managed to leave its rough marks. His condition was shocking. He could not tolerate the smell of meat or wine, subsisting only on black bread and water. His eyesight possessed astonishing acuity in twilight, and his skin was painfully sensitive to any touch. When he began to be taught literacy, he recounted a story that seemed the product of a madman's imagination, but was supported by his chillingly sincere demeanor. He claimed that for as long as he could remember, he had spent his entire life in a cramped, dark cell, no more than 2 steps wide, and not tall enough to stand upright. There he sat on straw, playing with a wooden horse, and never saw the face of his jailer, who brought him food while he slept. Such an existence outside human society, outside the light and sounds of civilization, transformed him into a living paradox. While Europe was seething after the Napoleonic Wars, attempting to redraw borders and restore old monarchies, in the very heart of Germany emerged a man who did not know what the sun was and did not understand the concept of time. Professor Georg Friedrich Daumer, who became the youth's first serious mentor, noted that Kaspar reacted to colors and sounds with an intensity bordering on physical pain. For the scholars of that time, he became an ideal subject for studying the nature of the human soul. Was he the embodiment of Rousseau's noble savage, or the victim of a social experiment unprecedented in its cruelty? These questions troubled his contemporaries, but beneath the philosophical ponderings lay a much more mundane and dangerous reality connected with political intrigues of the highest order. The outer layer of this conflict was rooted in the deep and dark waters of the dynastic disputes of the House of Baden. In those years, a legend of a swapped prince was whispered across Europe. Grand Duke Karl of Baden and his wife Stephanie de Beauharnais, adopted daughter of Napoleon Bonaparte, lost 2 of their sons under highly suspicious circumstances. The first heir, as official documents claimed, concluded his earthly journey 2 weeks after birth in 1812. However, rumors persistently claimed that the infant was replaced with a dying child of a common worker to clear the path to the throne for another branch of the dynasty, the descendants of Countess Hochberg, the morganatic wife of the previous duke. If Kaspar Hauser was indeed the kidnapped prince, then his existence posed a direct threat to the legitimacy of the ruling House of Baden. Every attempt he made to recall his past Every glimmer of recognition in his eyes at the sight of aristocratic coats of arms could become a detonator for a political explosion capable of shattering the fragile order established by the Congress of Vienna. The political map of Germany in the first half of the 19th century was a patchwork quilt of small principalities and kingdoms, where matters of succession were decided not only in ministerial offices, but also behind tightly curtained palace bedroom windows. Baden, occupying a strategically important position on the border with France, was under the close scrutiny of the great powers. The disappearance of a direct male heir in the main line led to Leopold ascending the throne, his rights disputed by many proponents of pure blood. In this context, Kaspar Hauser was not merely an unfortunate orphan, but a living embodiment of a state crime. His sudden appearance in Nuremberg, outside Baden's jurisdiction, created incredible tension. Police officials and high-ranking jurists, such as Anselm von Feuerbach, began their own investigation, which, with each step, became more deeply mired in a swamp of circumstantial evidence and strange coincidences. Feuerbach, one of the most brilliant criminologists of his era, became convinced that Kaspar was the victim of a crime against the human soul, committed for political gain. Kaspar's inner world during this period was an arena of no less fierce struggle. Imagine a consciousness that, in a few months, had to undergo an evolutionary path that takes decades for an ordinary person. From a being who knew only the taste of bread and the cold of stone, he was transforming into a personality with subtle feelings and complex perceptions. His diaries, which he began to keep under Dahmer's guidance, are full of painful realizations. He suffered from his past life being stolen, and simultaneously feared a future that demanded he conform to societal expectations. His guardians changed one after another, and each of them tried to mold the youth in their own image. Professor Dahmer saw in him a spiritual phenomenon. Lord Stanhope, a wealthy English aristocrat who appeared in Kaspar's life later, surrounded him with luxury and promises of adoption, but at the same time systematically destroyed his trust in his former friends. Kaspar's internal conflict was exacerbated by a constant feeling of being watched and threatened. He felt that he didn't belong to himself. For some, he was a curiosity displayed to guests. For others, a dangerous witness whose silence had to be ensured at any cost. His ambitions were modest. He wanted to be an ordinary person, to have a family and a profession. But his origin, real or attributed, made him a perpetual hostage to others' interests. The fear he experienced in his dark cell was replaced by a fear of open spaces, where every passerby could turn out to be either a savior or that mysterious person who once led him into the light and left him alone in an unfamiliar city. This psychological pressure undermined his health and made his behavior strange, which gave ill-wishers reason to accuse him of acting and lying. On a deeper ideological level, the story of Kaspar Hauser became a clash of two worldviews. On one side stood the rationalism of the Enlightenment, which believed that a person could be educated and shaped through reason and schooling. On the other side, a grim romanticism saw in Hauser's story a manifestation of dark, unfathomable forces of fate and human cruelty. This conflict questioned the very essence of civilization. If society is capable of producing such a crime as the lifelong isolation of a child in darkness, then does it have the right to call itself progressive? The paradox was that Kaspar, being absolutely pure of social prejudices, saw the world in its true light, noticing lies and hypocrisy where ordinary people were accustomed to not noticing them. His presence was a silent reproach to the entire system of values of then Europe, where the interests of dynasties were placed above the life and freedom of an individual. The transformation of public perception of Kaspar Hauser occurred abruptly and tragically in October of 1829. At Professor Dalmer's house, where the young man lived, the first assassination attempt took place. An unknown masked man attacked him in the restroom, inflicting a wound on his forehead. This event instantly shattered the aura of security surrounding the Nuremberg foundling. The city was horrified. It became clear that those who had kept him in the dungeon had no intention of leaving him alive now that he had begun to speak. However, this same event also sparked the first wave of skepticism. Some officials and ordinary citizens began to suspect that Kaspar had inflicted the injuries upon himself to attract attention or avoid difficulties in learning. This duality, victim or hoaxer, began to haunt him until the very end. The young man's friends increased his protection, but political pressure grew, and Kaspar was moved to the city of Ansbach under the guardianship of the strict and dry teacher Meyer. In Ansbach, Kaspar's life changed beyond recognition. The gentle care of Dahmer was no more, replaced by strict discipline and constant reproaches for insincerity. It is here that Lord Stanhope enters the scene, whose role in this story still causes heated debate among historians. On the one hand, he spent enormous sums on Kaspar's upkeep and promised to take him to England. On the other hand, his connections with the Baden court and strange behavior suggest that he was sent to control the young man and, possibly, to prepare the ground for his ultimate elimination. Stanhope gradually alienated Kaspar from those who genuinely wanted to get to the truth, instilling in him thoughts of his great destiny, but taking no real steps to uncover the mystery of his origin. By 1833, the atmosphere around Kaspar had reached its boiling point. Feuerbach, the young man's main defender, unexpectedly met his end, leaving behind an unfinished investigation and mysterious words that his life had been intentionally cut short because of the Hauser case. The culmination of this protracted drama occurred on December 14, 1833, in the snow-covered city park of Ansbach. Kaspar went there, claiming that a stranger had promised to give him documents shedding light on his past. Instead of answers, he received a blow to the chest with a sharp object. Bleeding profusely, he managed to reach home, where he could barely speak. A note, written in mirror script, was found at the scene stating, "Hauser will be able to describe to you precisely what I look like and where I came from. To spare Hauser the trouble, I myself want to tell you where I am from." The content of the note was absurd and suspicious, as if it had been planted to further confuse the investigation. 3 days later, on December 17th, the heart of the young man, known as the Child of Europe, stopped forever. His last words were that he had not inflicted these wounds upon himself. Kaspar Hauser's demise did not end the disputes. It only gave them a new, almost mystical dimension. The investigation conducted immediately after the tragedy was full of contradictions. Doctors were divided in their opinions. Some considered the wound fatal and inflicted by another's hand, while others, under pressure from the authorities, leaned towards the version that the young man was again trying to attract attention and had overdone it. However, the scale of panic in official circles in Baden and attempts to destroy any documents related to the case spoke for themselves. If he had been a simple impostor, why spend such resources on discrediting and eliminating him? Hauser's story became a symbol of how the state machine can erase a person if they hinder grand designs. His grave in Ansbach, with the inscription, "Here lies Kaspar Hauser, a mystery of his time, his origin unknown, his demise mysterious," became a place of pilgrimage for those seeking truth in a world of lies. The resonance of this story is felt even today, almost 2 centuries later. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, modern technology, it seemed, should have put an end to this matter. In 1996, the first DNA analysis was conducted based on bloodstains from Kaspar's clothes, preserved in a museum. The results then showed no connection to the House of Baden. However, in 2002, a new study, conducted using more advanced methods based on the preserved hair of the young man, yielded the opposite result, confirming the probability of his belonging to an aristocratic line. In 2024, an international group of scientists conducted an even deeper analysis, which again confirmed Kaspar Hauser's genes contained unique markers characteristic specifically of the House of Zeringen. These scientific discoveries force us to reconsider not only the biography of one young man, but also an entire chapter of European history. The lesson we learn from the story of Kaspar Hauser goes far beyond criminology or genetics. It is a story about a person's right to their own identity, and how easily that right can be sacrificed for political expediency. In our modern world, where information seems accessible and secrets are a relic of the past, Hauser's fate reminds us that behind the glossy facades of power, dark cellars can always hide. We see in Kaspar a reflection of our own desire to find our roots and understand our place in the world. His tragedy is a reminder of the fragility of the human psyche in the face of systemic cruelty, and that truth has an astonishing ability to break through the centuries, even if attempts were made to bury it in the deepest dungeon. Concluding this journey in the footsteps of the Nuremberg foundling, we inevitably return to that very evening in May 1828. We see a youth standing in the square who does not yet know that he will become a symbol of one of humanity's greatest mysteries. His innocence and purity were his only weapons against a world that had already condemned him. Today, we understand that Kaspar Hauser was not merely an object of an experiment or a pawn in a Game of Thrones. He was a person who, despite years of darkness, retained within himself the light of curiosity and kindness. And although his earthly path was cut short, his story continues to live on, forcing each of us to ponder, what makes us human? Our blood, our upbringing, or our ability to maintain dignity even when they try to strip us of our name and memory? Kaspar Hauser found his peace, but the questions he posed to the world remain open, calling on us to be vigilant guardians of truth and humanity in all, even the darkest times. Kaspar's story is not just an archive case. It is a mirror reflecting society's capacity for compassion or complete indifference. When we look at portraits of this young man, we see not only a child of Europe, but also everyone who has been unjustly forgotten or intentionally erased from the memory of history. His life was a brief flash between 2 periods of darkness, the darkness of his cell and the darkness of his untimely demise. But this flash was so bright that its reflections are still visible today. And as long as his memory lives, as long as scientists debate the results of DNA tests and poets write verses about him, Kaspar Hauser remains a victor over those who wished to condemn him to eternal oblivion. His name, inscribed in words on stone and in the hearts of people, has become an eternal reminder that no secret can be hidden forever if there remains at least one person in the world yearning for justice. The intrigues of the 19th century seem distant, but the mechanisms that led to Hauser's tragedy are universal. The pursuit of power at any cost, the fear of truth, the use of manipulation and discreditation. All these we encounter in modern discourse as well. Therefore, studying such historical narratives is not merely a tribute to the past, but an exercise in our critical thinking. We learn to see hidden motives behind official versions. We learn to value evidence and not to blindly trust those who try to impose a convenient lie on us. Kaspar Hauser, by his appearance and his departure from life, forced the world to mature, showing that even the most perfect system can fail if it is based on a crime against an individual. In the finale of this long and convoluted chronicle, it is worth recalling another aspect: the power of the human spirit. Kaspar, who spent years in isolation, did not become embittered. He yearned for knowledge. He loved animals. He tried to understand the beauty of nature that had been taken from him for so long. This testifies to the fact that the human in us is much stronger than circumstances. Even in the deepest darkness, the soul strives for light, and this yearning is inextinguishable. Kaspar Hauser's story is a hymn to this unquenchable yearning, transformed into a sad but majestic symphony, the sounds of which will resonate as long as humanity questions its origin and its true essence. Each generation finds something of its own in Kaspar's fate. For the 19th century, he was a scientific enigma. For the 20th, a symbol of political oppression. For the 21st, an object of high-tech investigation. But behind all these roles stands a living person, whose voice we try to hear through the noise of centuries. And perhaps the main mystery of Kaspar Hauser lies not in whose son he was, but in how he managed to remain human where it seemed impossible. This is the final chord that brings us back to the beginning, to the youth in the square, holding a letter to the future, which we continue to read today. Concluding this narrative, we leave Kaspar where he belongs, in the space of our imagination and our striving for truth. His journey, which began in darkness and ended in a winter park, has become an eternal road in search of justice. And though we may never know all the details of the conspiracy behind his fate, the very knowledge of him makes us wiser. We close this page knowing that the story of the child of Europe is complete, but its lessons will accompany us in every new search for truth, reminding us that every person is an entire universe, deserving to be seen and recognized.